Today's daf is daf mem gimel, and we're continuing with the machlokes between Chachamim and Reb Shimon in a case of a man who is tovea, an ones, or a mafata, and he didn't specify whether or not he's suing for the knas or he's suing for the bosh supagam, the maikon miflagi. And what is the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chacham? Rabbi Shimon, if you remember, says that the tviyah is on knas, and therefore there's no chiyuv korban shvuah. The Chacham, on the other hand, say that the tviyah is on bocha supagam. So the Gemara analyzes. Omer Papa, Rabbi Shimon savar lo shavik inish midei de kitz v'tava midei de lo kitz. When a person has a double tviyah, he puts his emphasis on one aspect and not on both. He's afraid of overwhelming the defendant who's being sued, and the defendant is going to deny the claim simply because it's such a heavy claim. So now the question is, and this is going to be the machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim, in the case of onus and mafata, what should he, the father, claim? According to Reb Shimon, he's going to claim for something that's midi dekayitz. That means it's a set uniform price, and that's called knas. And right now, at present time, he's not going to put his emphasis on bosha supagam, because bosha supagam is eno kayitz. It is subjective. It's not kotzuv. It's not set and uniform. And it all depends, if you recall, on the Mavayesh and the Mizvayeshes. And the father will only be Toveh now Knas. And that's why, if the accused denies the claim, he is involved in a kfiras mamon. However, it's not mamon, it's Knas. And therefore, it's not similar to all those on the list of the kichesh be'amiso, and therefore Reb Shimon holds there's no chiv korban shvuah. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, say lo shavik inich midi dechimodi be lo miftar v'tava midi dechimodi be miftar. Although it's true that there's a certain advantage to the uniform absolute fee of knas that's set in stone, but on the other hand, there's a very major drawback if the father puts all his emphasis in his claim against the ones and mafata on the knas. If he does so, then if the ones on the mafata will be modeh, then modeh v'knas potter. He'll undermine the chiyuv. Better claim for bosha supagam, because in bosha supagam, if I can get him to give a hodah with that confession, he generates a chiv to pay me bosha supagam, because that's moment and not knas. But let's just summarize what I'm going to give now is a little bit of a summary of everything that we learned yesterday, with the addition of this little piece that we learned today. What is the machlokes now between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim? Number one, the knas of ones umafata. At what point can it be transformed and, if you will, upgraded to the status of mamon? According to Chachamim, immediately with hamada b'din, the very moment that after the toveh, the av, has put forth all his claims and his evidence thereof, and Bezdin, based on those claims, hands down a ruling that the ones mafat is chayiv, at that point, hamada b'din, it's no longer a knas, and now it becomes mamon. And therefore, if the father would be tovea the ones and say, well, in another bezdin, they already handed down a ruling that you chayiv knas, then in such a case, we would apply the principle of hodas baldin kemeh edidami. And if he were to confess the crime, and in this case confess that indeed in another court they ruled that he's obligated to pay this knas, then based on his own confession, he'd have to pay. Reb Shimon, on the other hand, says no. It all depends on Shas Gvir. At what point does the Knas of Onus Mafata get upgraded to the status of Mammon? Only after the collection, as the pasuk says, V'nosan. Second machlokas between the same Rabban and Reb Shimon regarding carbon shvua. In the case of Onus Mafata, when the accused denies the claim, Chachamim say that if he takes a shvua to that effect, and then later on he does tshuva and he confesses, then he has to bring a carbon asham, and the entire rigmarole of Parshas carbon shvua applies. According to Reb Shimon, on the other hand, he's parted from a carbon shvua because the tviyah is a tviyah on knas, and it doesn't fit into the pattern of a kichesh b'miso, b'bikon, b'tumas yad, etc., etc. Furthermore, we should point out that in the case of a carbon shvua, if something is ikro knas, then Rabbi Shimon is going to insist that since it's ikro knas, it always is excluded absolutely from carbon shvua. Whereas the Chacham say, wait a minute, all right, it was a tvi on ikro knas, but now Beis Din already gave the ruling, and that transformed and upgrades the knas to the status of mammon, and on a kfiras mammon, you chayv a carbon shvua. Boy minei Rav Avina me Rav Ashi bas hanizonis min ha'achim ma'isiyadel lemi. So let's just give the following introduction. In the framework of marriage, there's a ksuba, and the ksuba generates the following principle. He, the Baal, is obligated to support his wife, and she, the wife, the Isha, will give all her earnings to the Baal. And that's called, in the language of Masechet Ksubis, Maisa Yoder Tachas Mizonosel. Now the husband dies. He leaves an almana, and he has sons. The halacha is that as long as she remains an almana and she's not remarried, she continues to be supported by the estate of her late husband. Which means that although on a doraisa level, the halacha would be that after the death of her husband, who's now the father of the children, the sons should inherit their father. But we're going to take off a chunk of that inheritance, and we're going to use it to support the almana. But now the question is, if the halacha of mizonos continues even posthumously, and now she, the almana, is collecting mizonos from her brothers, right, the children of her father who inherited the father's estate, then maybe if she goes out and works and it has an earning of wages, those wages should accrue to her brothers, to the archer, because she's collecting from Bnei Yerusha for mizonos. Then we have a principle of Maisir der Tachas Mizonosel. So the Gemara vacillates, Rabbi Avina. B'makom av kaimi, shall we assume that the sons who inherit their father really slip into the shoes of their father? Ma'ahasam, just like if the father were alive and he's supporting his wife, is Maisir der Liyah. He, the father, has the rights to collect all her wages. Tachanami, here too, since she is being supported from the inheritance, which really belongs to the brothers are in effect supporting her, is Maisir der Liachim. It's an exact parallel, a mirror image. It's always going to be Maisir Daim, quid pro quo for Mizonos. So if she's getting Mizonos from the sons as the heirs, then she has to give them Maisir Daim. O Dilma, lo dami li'ah. And now the Gemara is going to be machadej that in truth, after his death, the almana is not being supported by the brothers. That's not accurate. That's not a precise definition of what's going on. What's going on is that we're taking a chunk of the estate and we are removing it from the estate into a separate bank account, if you will, and that's where she will be supported. She's basically being supported by her late husband. Awesome. In the case of a wife, or we'll see about the daughters as well, when the father was alive, is mididei mitzina. The money is coming out of his pocket to support her, and therefore he has rights to get quid pro quo, as we said before. Ma'aseh yadayim. Hacha. Okay, I realized I made a mistake, and I apologize. Let's just rewind for a minute. I kept saying the brothers, which is correct, but at the same time, I kept saying the almana, which is not correct. Leave out the word almana. We'll get to almana a little bit later. I jumped the gun. But we're talking about the bas. Hence, we're talking about the issue between the sister and our brothers. The brothers are inheriting the father, and now she is going to be supported, meaning mizonos, by the estate of her, that's in the possession of her brothers. But the Gemara is saying, the estate itself is feeding the bas, which means that the inheritance was not on that which is needed for mizonos to support the bas. And therefore the achim have no right to come to, according to the second side of the Gemara, to come to the bas, to their own sister, and say, well, all your wages belong to us because we're supporting you. In the first side, yeah, they are supporting. The Yerusha goes to them after the death of the father, and they take from the Yerusha and they feed their sister, the bas. And therefore, they have a right to claim Ma'aseh there. But now, in the Gemara's second side, we're saying, no. They're not supporting the bas. The bas goes directly back to the estate of her father as if her father was still alive. And Rav Shesh's response is based on the mistake that I made before, but based on an analogy to the almana herself. Let's look at the case of the almana. And this is based on a Mishnah later on Daf Tzadi Hey. Almana nizonos minichse yisomin. So her husband dies, leaves an estate, which is inherited by the heirs, and she continues, as she did during the lifetime of her husband, to be supported from that funds. Umaisi yodeh shalahem. And now, since she is drawing from the estate, she has to fork over quid per quo her Ma'aseh yadayim. And therefore, we should apply the same exact logic to the case of the bas. She's being supported from the Yerusha of the sons, meaning her brothers, and therefore she has to fork back over the Ma'aseh yadayim. So Gemara says, "Midami." Now, at this point, the Gemara is going to make a surprising move. And it's going to analyze the psychology of the late father or the late husband, whichever way you want to call it, and we'll analyze it in both veins. What was he thinking? What was his interest? And that's a very surprising move that the Gemara is about to make. I wouldn't think that it should depend upon, an analysis of the mindset of the father. These are dinim of ksuba, these are dinim of mizonos, of Ma'aseh yadayim, but the Gemara says it all depends on the psychology of the father. Midam. Al minasalo nichale bar vach, but bito nichale bar vach. In both cases, whether it's the bas or the almana, she will be supported. What about her wages? Her wages are called by the Gemara harvacha, like almost a luxury item. After all, it's a fee, it's a sum of money that's above and beyond her basic needs. Components includes share, ksus, viona, all her basic needs. Her wages are going to really, in a sense, if you pardon the expression, make her wealthy. She becomes a wealthy woman. Why? Because she has no expenditures. All her expenditures are covered by mizonos. So she has a pure profit. When she works from 9 to 5, it gets a salary check. And herein lies the difference between an almana and a bas in the psychology and the mindset of the deceased, meaning before he died. If you would have asked him, where in a tug of war are you more interested in harvacha, with regard to your wife or with regard to your daughter? Now, every father has the inherent obligation, which is not only halachic, but also emotional, of marrying off his daughter. He therefore, as far as his wife is concerned, the almana, let's cover all her mizonos. I don't have to guarantee her harvacha, and if she's making wages, then they should be paid back into the estate, quid pro quo, in lieu of her mizonos. But as far as my bas is concerned, I want her to be a desirable single girl on the market, on the shidduch market. I would like to have harvacha. It's like when I was a kid, they say, oh, marry a rich girl. You remember that phrase? I don't know if anyone here lived up to that. But you marry a rich girl. So he, the father, would like the daughter to make and earn wages. So she's kaviyachol a little bit rich. That's called harvacha. And then he feels that he's no longer guilty if she can't find a shidduch. He did whatever he could to upgrade her status on the shidduch market. The Gemara says, wait a minute. L'meimer de bas adifa le me'almanoso? I'm going to prove to you that a man is more concerned with his almana than with the bas. And that's going to be nogeh to basic fundamental monies coming in. And it may mean that the bas, insofar as she's less on the mind of the father than his almana, she might have to actually go knocking on the doors. And this is called nechasim mu'atim, which is an important concept in Masechet Ketuvot. Ve'omar Rabbi Abba, Omar Rabbi Yossi. This is a Gemara actually at the end of Baba Basra. A person died, he left sons, he left daughters. The daughters he wants to support, the sons are the heirs that inherit the estate. And they're nechasim mu'atim. There's only a limited amount of financially viable in the estate. So the halacha here is the following. Now keep in mind that nechasim mu'atim means that there's only enough support for 12 months, not a penny more. And the halacha is, this is called Tanai Ksubas Ha'ima, that the banos will be supported from the nechasim. Even if it means, because there's only enough for 1 year, that the banim will not inherit a single dime from their father. What about the almana? Asu almana etzel abas, kibas etzel ha'achim nechasim mu'atim. Ma bas etzel ha'achim, bas nizones, abas nizones v'achim yishalu ha'psachim. Af almana etzel abas, almana nizones, v'ubas tishal ha'psachim. So in a situation where it's a question either or of the banim or the banos, then the banos are adifos, and they will use that funds that her father left, even at the expense of the achim not being able to inherit a dime. So that's the relationship between bas and achim. Now, what's the relationship between bas and almana? In the Ketuvot says that a man has to support his wife continue to do so even after his death. On the other hand, he's obligated to support his daughters. And they're only nechasim muatim. To whom should those nechasim be earmarked? And the answer is to the almana, to his wife. And that means that just like in the case where bas versus ach and the achim are going to have to go panhandle, so too in the case of a wife, the almana, and the banos will have to go out and panhandle to support themselves, to scrape out a meal. And whatever nechasim muatim will go to the support of the wife. So we see that he's more concerned about his wife than his daughter. You just finished telling me no, that as far as the law of Masechet Daim is concerned, we said that the bas is superior to the almon. That in the case of the almona, she has to give her Masechet Daim back into the estate. In the case of the bas, we said no, she can pocket her own Masechet Daim. And the Gemara answers there are two different dimensions. There's one dimension of like starving, basic food and needs. And then there's another dimension called harvacha, becoming wealthy. Linyan zilusa, if it goes down to brass tacks, that fundamental support, and in the absence of that fundamental support, she's going to have to go down and panhandle, and that's called zilusa. That's a zilzul, and someone's covered in some basic human dignity. Then almana adifa. He's more concerned with the kavod, the honor and the status of his wife that he is of his daughters. Even if it means his daughters are going to have to go panhandle, he wants the kavod for his wife. And to tell his wife to go panhandle would be a zilzul b'chvod. But as far as harvacha is concerned, you know what? He feels that he did his best to support his almana, both during his lifetime and now posthumously. Why should she pocket her own Masechet Daim? But in the case of a bas, where he has vested interest in the harvach of the bas, as we discussed earlier, then let her keep her own Masechet Daim. Masir Rav Yosef quotes that Mishnah back on Membeis. Masechet Daim Mitziyasa. Look at that combination, Masechet Daim u'Mitziyasa. Now Mitziyasa means that she didn't earn it; she found it on the street. She found a pearl or a diamond, and Masechet Daim and her earnings, afal pishalo govsa, even though she did not collect her wages during the lifetime of her father. He died before the salary check came through. Based on now her father dies. We see that the Masechet Daim of the bas accrue to the achim. I mean, that's the exact opposite of what we said before. Taima de b'chaya av. She did malacha during the father's lifetime. The father already had a schus, a financial right to that Masechet Daim. And that right, monetary, is now bequeathed to his yarshim. The implication is that if the father died before she earned and received her wages, then liatzma, then she pockets the wages herself. And that means, my lab Benizona said, even though she's being supported by the brothers who are giving up of their own estate, of their own Yerusha that they inherited, for the sake of her mizonos, nevertheless, she pockets her own Masechet Daim. Again, Masechet Daim that she earned during the lifetime of her father, that the father was already zochen, and he transfers, he bequeaths it to us. But when she does Masechet Daim after his death, she pockets it. When it says lo bit she'ena nizonos, we're talking about a case where the brothers are not supporting her. Let's say the father didn't leave enough money in the estate to support the banos. So obviously, if she makes a living and she earns wages, that's hard. It's not getting any mizonos at all. So Gemara says, "He bein mizonos ma'ila meimah." Why did you have to even chadish to me that she pockets her Maisi Yadayim. What was the Havamina? You know, I mean, they're not even supporting her. If you have an Eved Kanani, you could tell the Eved, you know, go support yourself. The Adon is not obligated to support the Eved Kanani. He's got to work for the Adon, but he doesn't necessarily get mizonos. He'll get mizonos out of the goodness of the heart of the Adon. But Hani Mili be Eved Kanani. Only with regard to Eved Kanani can he say, I'm wiping myself, Adon, the master can say, I'm wiping myself my chiv to support you. The lok siv be imach. You don't find the word imach in the Pasuk Tovlo imach. And the Adon is not obligated in mizonos. Avol Eved Ivri dichsiv be. Imach, lo. He has no right to say, my friend, your Eved Ivri, please work for me. I'm not going to support you. Because the Pasuk says, Ima. Ki tovlo Ima. His koske bito. Goes without saying that in the case of Bas, he can't say, I'm not going to support you. If he can't say it to his Eved, certainly he can't say it to his Bas. So now he's going to say, oh, I'm going to take my Maisi Yadayim from you without supporting you. So obviously there's no chiddush here in this context of a case where she's not being supported. Omar Rabba Bar Ula, lo nitzucha el adafa. You know what the chiddush of this Mishnah is? It's a case of adafa. She's not being supported by her brothers, and she's making a good living. Let's say Mizonos would be X, and her Maisi Yadayim are X plus Y. And what's the finish now? Even though she's earning Maisi Yadayim more than Mizonos, and you might think that, okay, she's earning all that extra money. Let the Achim take that extra money. And we'll leave her enough money for Mizonos. So it means that even though the father, during his lifetime, has monetary rights to be Zoch in the Maisi Yadayim of his Bas, and that applies even to the Adafa, even to the Odef that goes beyond Mizonos, but that's not something that he bequeaths, that he's morish to his sons. So again, even though Adafa during the father's lifetime of Hamaisi Yadayim go to the father, but after his death, he's not morish to his sons those rights for Adafa. Omar Rava Gavra Rabba Rav Yosef Lo Yoda the Ika Adafa Kavosef Tifta. Why did Rav Yosef, who's a Gavra Rabba, ask this kasha? Didn't he know the answer of Hadafa? What he was unaware of the halach of Hadafa. Elama Rava Rav Yosef Masnisan Gufa Kasha. Rav Yosef was asking a kasha on the Mishnah itself. If you remember, the Mishnah combined Maisi Yadeh with Mitziyasa. The Katani Maisi Yadeh Mitziyasa of Pishal Govsa. Even though during the lifetime of her father, she did not collect Maisi Yadayim, nevertheless, they belong to the Achin. They're part of the Yerusha. Now that makes sense in Maisi Yadayim. But Mitziyah, Miman Gavya, what does it mean? She collected a loan, money that was owed to her. What do you mean collected a loan? You're talking about Mitziyah. She found a pearl in the street. It's making a halachic analogy and comparing Maisi Yadayim to Mitziyah. Ma Mitziyah b'chaya av la'av. Ma Mitziyah b'chaya av la'av. When does the father, under what conditions does he possess her mitzvah, that's only bechaya'ah. Well, let's say after the father dies, she went ahead and found a pearl, is liatzma. Liachar misav, liatzma. Hach ma'isiyah der nami bechaya'av la'av. Liachar misav, liatzma. So it means even though she's being supported, mizonos, from the estate of her late father, but nevertheless, her ma'aseh yadayim, she pockets herself. Shmamina, and this is the final word, the raya, that even though the bas is nizonos mina achim, she still keeps her ma'aseh yadayim for herself. It marnami amar Rabbi Yehuda Rav bas nizonos mina achim ma'aseh yodeh li'atzmo. Rav Kahana, my time. What's the source for this whole halacha that the brothers have no right, no monetary right to a ma'aseh yadayim as opposed to the father? Because the pasuk says Vayikra Perek Chaf Hey in the parsha of Eved Knani, Visnachaltem osam levnechem achareichem. A person takes his Eved Knani, and with his death he's morish, he bequeaths it to his own children, osam. And that's a miut to limit it to Eved Knani, livnechem. Then you morish it to your bun. Below b'no seichem, livnechem. But you're not morish the banos to your banin. You be morish an Eved, because you have a kinyan gufo be'Eved, and you morish that together with all the other properties in your estate over to your children, your sons. But in the case of a bas, the father doesn't own the bas, the gufa, and when he dies, he cannot transfer his rights to ma'aseh yadayim over to the banin. Ain't no the morish suspito no. Maskef lo rabba. How do you know how to derive? Asks Rabba. This derivation from the pasuk in Vayikra Chafei in its context. Ema bepite abbas uknosos v'chavolos hakosim medaber. Now here the Gemara makes a distinction, which frankly speaking, I don't quite understand. Meaning, I have the distinction, but I don't know why it's relevant. So if you gentlemen can help me with this. The Gemara is going to distinguish between monetary rights that are shachiach, otherwise known as matzui, as opposed to unusual, fluky situations that arise. And the Gemara is going to say the following, that this principle of Eino de Morish Schus Bito Libno, that only applies in a Davar She'eno Mot. For example, the Knas of Onus Mafati, you can't say it's Motzu, Chas v'Shalom. You don't anticipate it happen. In a sense, it's a fluke. So that Tashlumin is called, of Onus Mafati, is called Davar She'eno Motzu. Chavola also. Eno Matzu. That person was victimized and assaulted, and now he's collecting compensation for the assault, or Motzi Shemra. All these cases are Enom Shchichim. And therefore, it's not logical that the rights of the father would be transferred through Yerusha over to the sons. But when we get to ma'aseh yadayim, and this is the kasha of Rabbah, ma'aseh yadayim is already something that's shchiyah. A woman goes to work 9 to 5, she gets a salary. And therefore, since the banim are taking a loss from the estate by supporting their sister, it makes sense now that the father's chus in the ma'aseh yadayim of his bas should be transferred and inherited with the Yerusha over to the sons. Why? Because it's a davar motz, davar shachiyah. V'chein toner Rabbi Chanina, v'piti abasu knos v'chavos hakosim medaber. When the pasuk that we saw before, v'snachaltem, teaches us that ein other morish chuso uspito lebanov, That's a reference to something that's not shchiach, but something that's shchiach, he would be morish to his bun. I don't understand exactly why that's so. I got stuck on this last night. The only thing I could say to you, gentlemen, is the following: that when you have a general assumption and then you whittle it down and restrict it, limit it by virtue of mute in the pasuk, so you choose the most logical mute, or no, let me say not the most logical mute because I don't understand the logic, but the the least damaging. In other words, you don't want to undermine the entire principle. So the principle is that a person gives Birusha all his own schuyos after his death. So now you're limiting it by based on this mute of Eino the Morish Schus Bito Lebano. So we're going to keep that that exception should be kept to its limit, to its smallest. That's called the Dover Shenu Shchia. So the Gemara says that it seems from the Brisa, I mean, it's explicit, that the father is Zochen Chavolos of his bas. So she was the victim of an assault, and the Chovel has to pay Tmei Chavola, 5 different categories, and that goes to the father. So the Gemara has to find Kash, Chavolos Tzara de Gufanin. I mean, she suffered the physical impact of this assault, and therefore it makes sense that she should be able to pocket that money. Now, what I think we're talking about here is a situation where the actual payment of the Chavola took place after the father was removed from the picture. Either he died, or she became Bogeres, or after Eris in the Suin. And now we're about to turn to Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis. Rav Yossi Bar Chanina.